So what was it like your first year of teaching abroad? How did you adapt to it? What was it what you expected?
It was a huge learning curve. I mean, I look back on that year, and there's just a lot of facepalm moments. I mean, I I I really try hard not to be, the stereotypical American when I'm overseas these days. But back then, I was just a moron. I mean, there there were some things like probably the worst case example of this was it was Lebanese Independence Day, and me and some of the other teachers thought, well, this it's Independence Day. This will be fun. We'll shoot off some fireworks from the roof of the building. It was a terrible idea because, as mentioned before, it was a really tense political situation in the city and the country, and there probably wasn't a worse possible thing we could have done. And it definitely got a lot of the wrong kind of attention. and I look back at things like that and just I really was behaving like the worst kind of American and not even really being conscious of it. And in a way, I'm glad though, because you have to kind of make mistakes to realize that you're making them. And so I like to think that as the years have gone by, I've gotten better about that, and just tried to listen more than talk, and think before I act.
Yeah.
So there's also the work, that I would say the expectations in a lot of overseas schools are higher for teachers than in American public. In American public, there were I found a lot of parents who weren't involved, who were really checked out, who would just kind of leave it up to the teacher. Um, when I worked in American overseas schools, it's completely the opposite. Very involved parents. A lot of times, the families are fairly well off. Maybe only one parent has to work, and so the other one is dedicating all their time to their child's education, which is great. But it can also result in, helicopter parenting. It can, but on the positive, it can result in having no shortage of parent volunteers to help you sort out the class library, things like that.
Mhm.
So they're very different, and it comes with a lot of pluses and minuses.
Were there any other differences you noticed between teaching at an American public school in the States and teaching overseas?
Well, I always tell my friends and family when they ask that kind of question, that probably the biggest differences are, these overseas schools tends to be very well funded. They uh, Most schools I've worked for, there's never been an issue of shortages, or this thing of having to buy school supplies for my students out of my own pocket. When I hear about my colleagues in the U.S. talk about that, it just blows me away. I
Mhm.
mean, I can't think of any other profession where you would be expected to buy your own supplies. I think it's ridiculous, and so that's one thing I really prefer about the overseas schools. That and no one's trying to shoot at you. And I say that only half kidding, but during the few times that I've come back to teach in the U.S., it's usually been short stints, and there's always that underlying fear of, oh my God, is a crazy person going to come in here and start shooting up the classroom?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and I realize that I've just talked about car bombs and Lebanon and everything else, but there it's like you're probably going to be okay so long as you're not running for a political office. but
Yeah.
but in the States, all you have to be doing is teaching math.
Just so I can kind of get a rough idea in my head of kind of how you bounce around schools. So you mentioned Lebanon and Bali. What other schools and countries did you work in?
It's a list. So there was Beirut, Bali, Borneo. There was New Zealand for a bit. There was Sweden. There was Qatar, and then back in the U.S. for a little while. and then Kathmandu, Nepal, and then Warsaw, and then finally Milan,
Wow.
Italy.
So it looks like kind of all over the Middle East, Asia, and Europe, as well as out there in New Zealand. Sounds like quite a plan. And so, since it's such a various geographic place that you're going to, how would you go about picking the next destination? And tell me a little bit about the recruitment process.
Yeah, I'd say that's something I would perhaps do a little differently if I could turn back the clock. The one thing that can really blemish your resume as a teacher is, and I think it is true for a lot of jobs, is moving around a lot. And I can point to every one of these countries and explain why I was there for only a short stint. And for the most part, it was just, not a good fit, or things were not as advertised, or it was just dumb luck. But I guess generally speaking, the way that the recruitment process works is you are there's a few avenues. The probably the best known ones are two major agencies. There's Search Associates and there's ISS, not to be confused with ISIS. So these two agencies are kind of like the big dogs for American overseas schools. And although they also work with British overseas schools, Canadian overseas schools, and what they have done over the last couple of decades or so is collected these massive databases of teachers and schools and tried to match them up. Every year, they host a number of job fairs, or at least they were up until the COVID times, and these job fairs are insane. They're often referred to as meat markets by teachers, and they're not for everyone. Me personally, I always loved going to them because they're great opportunities to network, even if you don't get a job. You learn so much about the field and all the schools that are out there, and what folks are offering, and get to talk with fellow international teachers, often teachers who have more experience in the field than you, so you can kind of pick their brain. There's also a lot of shenanigans. There's cocktails and things like that throughout the weekend. And it's always hosted in a really big fancy hotel, like, a Grand Hyatt or something like that. And it's such an insane experience because you have teachers who, historically have not made a lot of money, and they're going to this grand event in a 5-star hotel, and usually in some very expensive city like San Francisco or Singapore, and somehow they make this happen several times a year, every single year. Again, I kind of like the feeling of competition and lining up those interviews with all these top tier schools, but again, it's not for everyone. And the good news is, in recent years, there have come along other agencies that have a more low-key approach. And I think in the long run, these guys may be the ones that outpace the long-standing alpha agencies in the field. So these are companies like Teacher Horizons or TIC. TIC is one of my personal favorites. They're based out of the UK. And these guys, they don't host fairs. They have you present your resume to them, and they really just do the hunting for you. So TIC, I've worked with a lot, and the way it's usually worked with them is I let them know that I'm looking, and they get back to me in a week or so and say, hey, we've got this school in Yangon who wants to talk to you, or we've got this school in Bucharest that wants to talk to you. And they line up the interview, you sit the interview, and you get the job or you don't get the job. but
Yeah.
it saves, the airfare and the hotels and all that rigmarole. It's not, some would argue it's not the same as conducting in-person interviews, and of course they'd be right, but at the end of the day, I think especially in these times, I mean, yeah, doing things over the computer is just the new normal.